So thank you so much for being on the show.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here. This is a very exciting opportunity, so thank you.
I kind of like to start with what got you into this work. Like why is this something of interest to you in terms of, body acceptance and sex therapy, I suppose.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a state called Karnataka in India, specifically in the city of Bangalore, where I was surrounded by a lot of conservative notions about sex, and there was a strong impact of a patriarchal society on women's sexuality. And I found it really interesting that, I wasn't allowed to talk about sex, but other people were still allowed to comment on my body.
Mm.
So I had people tell me, you need to lose a little weight, like you look so big. I was compared to my sister. And so I was like very confused at how men could say things about my body, but I wasn't allowed to say things about my body and comment on my body and advocate for myself. And so I think from there on, there was this strong interest to go into this field and really provide a corrective experience for a lot of people that grew up in a similar environment.
Okay. And I mean, I guess I'm curious how you would differentiate like what makes sex therapy different than regular therapy, other forms of therapy. And do you think sex therapy specifically is helpful with this issue versus just seeing anybody?
I do. I actually have a lot of clients that reach out to me because they see sex therapy and they're interested in it, but they don't exactly know what it is. It just feels like something that feels right to them. And so what I tell them is that sex therapy is very similar to individual therapy and relationship therapy, but there's a specific emphasis on sex and sexuality. So sex therapy can be helpful for a number of reasons. I do also let my clients know that it doesn't involve any physical touch of sorts. I would say the main components of my work as a sex therapist has been sex education, psychoeducation, the role of like body acceptance in all of this, because a lot of people that come to me and are frustrated with their way that they function as sexual beings, a lot of it stems from, an inability to even accept their own body, and then they're
Mm.
looking at other people to accept their body for them, right? And so I don't think we can separate this notion of sex and body image. I think that it's so related, but we don't see a lot of that intersection, which I find
Hmm.
curious.
Yeah. So how, I mean, how do you, I guess you work in sex therapy in a way that helps people with body acceptance and get free
Mhm.
of body shame?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with a lot of different populations, but I would say that one specific population that I work with are, people of color in larger bodies, trans and non-binary people in bodies that they're transitioning into, and some people where they identify as trans and non-binary, but they're not happy with the way their body's showing up for them, and the disconnection that shows up in their sex lives is very like connected. And so I specifically use sex therapy as a way to look into sexual self-esteem, um, to help people talk about the ways that they feel about their body, and utilizing, a technique called sensate focus, which is essentially having people sit face to face and gently tracing each other's bodies without necessarily having it be sexual. And exercises like that can actually be really powerful in helping people accept their own bodies, um, and also the bodies of their spouse. Because a lot of
Hmm.
the times I'll have clients say to me, I don't know if I'm attracted to my spouse. They've gained weight, right? And it's a very valid concern that I'm sure a lot of people feel.
Right.
And when they're able to do something like sensate focus therapy, they can really start to appreciate their partner and their partner's body, and that might even help them, be kind to their own body. And I see this specifically in relation to aging and how the body changes as we age, and a lot of people having a hard time with that.
Yeah, I think maybe I should have started with that. Like, how? the people you work with, what kind of ways is this showing up? Like, what are they coming in complaining about or talking about, or how is this blocking them, from sexual expression?
Absolutely. I think to start off, I do want to talk a little bit about low sexual self-esteem, which is where people feel very uncomfortable with how they show up as a sexual being. So they might not feel sexy, they might not feel good about themselves and their body. And so they're showing up in a way that's like, I want to be intimate with you, but I'm also like hiding myself and covering myself.
Mm.
And I think in a way, this can inhibit the intimacy that can form between them and other people because they're so closed off in their own body, and that translates to intimacy. And intimacy is um, a beautiful word. And I've heard the saying of like intimacy is into me, you see. And if we're not comfortable with looking at ourselves, how can we let other people look into us and see them and see ourselves? And so I think that plays a huge role in people not feeling sexually connected to their partners, people struggling with being in their bodies during sex. A lot of people are in their head, they're thinking about work. And I think it's because sometimes we feel so uncomfortable with our body that we want to be anywhere but in our body. So
Yeah,
those
or
are,
we're in our head thinking about how do I look? Is my stomach
yeah,
sticking? Whatever it is, right? Like we're not in
absolutely.
our experience. We're worried. Yeah.
And I've been there, even as a sex therapist. I've still had moments where I've noticed the way my body looks in sexual expression, and I felt shame or I felt the need to cover up. And I think it's so interesting that even we can learn as much as we do, and these things are so deeply ingrained in us that they can still pop out of us, that pop out of nowhere when we're least expecting it.
Yeah. Another place I imagine shows, I mean, at least I hear this from my clients, is, starting to just avoid sex and intimacy, right? Like, I mean, just make excuses. I just don't want to be in a place where I feel that uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Avoiding intimacy. And I see this a lot specifically in relation to my queer clients, where, as their bodies are transitioning, they feel very closed off to intimacy because they don't feel comfortable in their bodies. And so, turning off sexual expression is a way to cope with that.
Yeah. And so
And
people who are transitioning, well, probably they didn't feel comfortable in their body originally, and they kind of have to, what do you grow into the new one? I mean, like somehow
yeah,
get to know it and inhabit it.
exactly.
You
As for
mentioned,
women, yeah.
sorry, you mentioned larger bodied people, you mentioned aging, but I'm imagining people can struggle with this body shame or disacceptance no matter what they look like. I mean, we might look at somebody and think they're gorgeous and they could still have this kind of self-consciousness, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way we see ourselves is unfortunately a lot stronger than how people see us. I think this can also be, applied to people of color that feel the need to fit into this idea of beauty that's very white, patriarchal, and feeling anger at their body for not looking a specific way.
Yeah.
Um, I also see this with people when it comes to things like, erectile dysfunction or vaginismus, where they're feeling so closed off. And there could be a lot of reasons for why they might show up that way, but they sometimes have a hard time accepting that their body's not functioning in the way they want it to, and that can be very frustrating.
Yeah. You've already alluded to a few, but I'm wondering, like, what do you see as the sources of this body shame? I mean, because there seemed like there must be 100, like so we get these messages from so many places, but like when you're working with clients, what are the kinds of things you're uncovering that seeded these messages in the first place?
I think it starts with our environment, honestly, like comments that family members make when we're kids, which is bizarre to me that people are commenting on children's bodies. But it happened to me. I'm sure it's happening to children still, right? So you grow up without being able to critically think about these messages and you internalize them.
Hmm.
I think we also have to ask the question of who's benefiting from people feeling uncomfortable in their bodies and the role of, capitalism and making people feel like if they buy enough things, if they do enough things, then they can accept their body. that the concept of beauty is manufactured. It's not,
Mm.
it's not real. It doesn't really, it looks a certain way, it talks a certain way, etc.
To sell things, basically. Right. Or to have power over, I would imagine. You've mentioned the patriarchy several times, but I mean, in so many ways, it's probably about disempowering people.
Yeah, and then I also do want to take, a minute to talk about the impact of seeing naked bodies on screen. And now, I do think that porn is a very healthy thing. It's the first time that people stumble upon naked bodies that they're seeing. So I don't think it's porn specifically, but it is certain kinds of porn that are very, very stereotypical heterosexual people, where women's bodies are portrayed looking a specific way. And so there can even be this like unconscious correlation of, in order to feel that pleasure, I need to look that way.
Yeah, the beauty standards. I mean, actually, I think that applies to men too. I certainly hear from clients who like,
Absolutely. With
mine isn't that big, right? Am I okay? That self-consciousness it hits in.
Yes. And I
Yeah,
think I'm glad you brought that up because I do think that a lot of people with penises struggle with comparing themselves to what they see, and
right.
that can even contribute to body shame.
Yeah. Anything else? I mean, I guess I'm thinking you mentioned a religious background, right?
Religion, absolutely. Advertisements, movies.
Yeah,
And I think that this sort of messaging can even be passed down generationally through genetics. There's so much we are still learning about the impact of, generational trauma being passed down. And I do think that there is also something to say about this sort of body shame that gets passed down through generations.
right. And I imagine you've heard that another one that's occurring to me is sometimes we get feedback, criticism from partners, like actual, lovers who will make some comment out of whatever misguided, you know, whatever way. We do this to each other, right?
Yeah, it's very painful to see. And for some reason, body size is correlated with health, right? So people will say, I want to look healthy. I want my partner to be healthy. But what they're saying is, I want my partner to lose weight so they're more socially acceptable as an attractive person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're like using this standard of what health is in order to shame people.
Right. So, where does pleasure fit into this conversation, and how is is that? I guess I'm wondering, do you have people focus on pleasure instead of this, or what's the role of pleasure in the healing journey?
Yeah. So I actually have this quote on my website and Psychology Today profile that says, "For oppressed people to cultivate pleasure is an act of resistance."
Mm,
I truly believe that deep down in my bones. Myself, as someone that grew up as a person of color in a very, and then came to the U.S. and felt the need to look a certain way. I didn't believe I was deserving of pleasure until I really started to, do this work and go to therapy and really get to know myself and my body. And it was actually through the sex positive community in New York City that I came to accept and love my body. And it's such a beautiful gift to be in an environment where people are openly talking about bodies and sexuality. And I think talking about it helps release some of that. And you get to meet people that are like, oh, I feel that too. And so it feels less isolating. I've also found a lot of pleasure um, in these sex positive spaces, and it doesn't just have to be sexual pleasure. It can be pleasure from connecting with people. It can be, pleasure from learning new things that help me see the world differently. But if we're focusing on sex specifically, I think the notion of feeling sexual pleasure in your body, no matter what you look like, is such a beautiful thing to keep in mind. Because the pleasure you feel if you're able to really be in your body, it's the same pleasure you'll feel if you lose weight. Like our body parts are body parts, an orgasm in a bigger body is not going to feel any different as an orgasm in a smaller body. And so I think helping people realize that they can feel pleasure in their body just the way it is, if they allow themselves to feel pleasure. Because a lot of the times, it's not that people don't want to give them pleasure in larger bodies, it's that they might not feel deserving of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're bringing up a few different things. Feeling worthy or deserving of it. It seems like a big potential hurdle. Like that's got to happen. And then there's experiencing that pleasure, which in my mind puts us in touch with what our bodies are really for. It's not like it's not what we look like. It's this is our function, and this gift we have built in, all that sensation and nerve endings. So I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that idea that it's an act of resistance. Like, let me resist the cultural messages about what I'm supposed to look like or what the beauty standards are, or whatever. Yeah.
Yes. So there's this short documentary episode called Planet Sex on Hulu that Cara Delevingne produced. And there was one specific episode that really stood out to me because they talked about how, attraction isn't fully necessary for sexual pleasure. And that was the first moment that I really sat and thought about that. And I think I allowed myself to, seek experiences that are just beyond what I thought I was attracted to. And I found that no matter what people look like, if I want to engage with them, I can feel pleasure in my body.
Yeah. I don't remember which episode it was, but there was also, if you saw that Sex, Love, and Goop, I think it was called, a
Yeah.
little 6 episode thing. And one of them was with this mirror work and body acceptance. There was some really lovely stuff in there about, how to
Yeah.
start to work with letting go of that shame.
Yeah. Sometimes I have clients, even for homework, look at their vulvas in the mirror, look at their body, and clients tell me they can't do it. Like
Mm.
they're just this block. They have a very hard time looking at themselves naked.
And how heartbreaking is that, right? That we would so thoroughly reject a part of our body that is there
Yeah.
for pleasure.
It makes me
Yeah.
very sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, it's heartbreaking is the right word for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think, they're always fully aware that that is what they're doing. So I think
Yeah.
seeing a human reaction in response to that can help them recognize, like, oh, maybe I am being really hard on myself.
Yeah. And think about what that blocks. If somebody can't even look at their genitals, how connected can they be to the pleasure that they might have,
Yep, I
and
see
being
this a
fully
lot.
present with a partner,
Exactly. And we see this with, criticism about the way that vulvas need to look. We have, a rising market of people going in for surgeries on their vulva to tighten it, to, put their skin flap inside. So even when it comes to specific body parts, like you could be a skinny person in a body and you could still feel insecure because your vulva doesn't look the way it's supposed to. So
the way
like
you,
where
well, the way you think it's supposed to, right? This image you've
exactly,
bought. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly the way you think it's supposed to look like.
Right.
So
So, what kinds of impacts does it make for somebody to move towards body acceptance and pleasure and that empowerment and everything else? What kind of impacts does that have in their relationship and intimacy? Like, I don't know if you want to share comments that you actually heard from clients or just your own thoughts about that.
yeah, well, I can say just broadly in my work, what I've recognized is that sex and intimacy through pleasure is a path towards body acceptance. And I think that I see this especially when I work with people in relationships. So I have two people in the room, and their homework usually involves, doing homework with each other and like really looking at each other's bodies. And I've seen so much growth from that. I've had people that initially told me I wasn't very attracted to my partner because they gained a bunch of weight. And then, months later after doing this work have said, like, I am attracted to my partner and I do appreciate their body. I love their stretch marks. I love their curves. And to hear those different narratives and the power of intimacy and letting people accept your body the way it is it's amazing.
And I mean, I guess I have two questions about where you want to see these conversations go, like professionally in terms of our training as sex therapists and educators and things like that. Where's the role, or what do you want the future to be around conversations around body acceptance?
I wonder if, a lot of sex therapists would benefit from even taking training on this. I know that when I took my training as a sex therapist, there really weren't courses that talked about this intersection. And I
Hmm.
found that very interesting because we can theorize about sex all we want, but if we're not feeling like doing it in the bodies we're in, unless you're aromantic or asexual, that's a different thing. So I would like to see our field really understand how the way that people view their bodies impacts their sexual functioning. And unfortunately, we cannot, talk their way out of it.
Right.
They have somatic components. And so I would love to see therapists receive somatic training that can help people get to connecting with their bodies, because I
Yeah.
think what they need to do before connecting with other people is to connect with themselves.
Yeah. And then I'm curious what advice you might give to parents to not perpetuate this. I mean, I get that we've got the whole society giving all these messages, but our
Yeah.
families can help or hinder, right? So, I don't know, what are some pieces of advice you'd give to parents to not burden their children more?
I think in an alternative universe, I would have loved if my parents had access to therapy where they were able to work on their own body image, because a lot of what is said to kids is projected
Mm,
them, right? And so I think it really starts with understanding ourselves, and I'm very happy to see that more and more people are going to therapy and talking about this. And so when they have kids, I hope that they're a lot more self-aware of the messages they're sending their kids, because they
yeah.
have done a lot of internal work of unlearning.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is we're not going to be able to give a message of body acceptance if we are not living that. I mean, if we're not accepting our own bodies, somehow that's going to color
Yeah, and I
how we're.
don't think body acceptance is a destination by any means. I think it's just a roller coaster that we are forever on. So I think that there is no fully being at like acceptance at 100%. And maybe some people get there, but for a lot of people, it depends on the day, it depends on their hormones, it depends on, what's happening in the world outside. So just being gentle with ourselves and the bodies we're in, and having a lot of grace for it, I think is a good first step.
Okay. And would you be willing to share a couple of things listeners could do to connect with their bodies? You know, like even like tonight, I don't know if I'll put you on the spot a little bit, but any ideas about action steps? You know, you said it was somatic, not just
Yeah,
listening about this, you know.
absolutely. So something I like to have clients do is sit in front of a mirror with a journal and just journal about what's coming up for them as they look in their body, and not having it be perfect or anything, almost using it as stream of consciousness to write down, okay, this is what I'm feeling about my body, and then take it into either their therapy sessions or talking about it with friends and saying, this is how I've been feeling. Have you ever felt this way? And so, really looking at themselves in the mirror is a good first place to start.
And do you see them doing this naked or just to
I
be
see them
clear?
doing this naked.
Okay.
Yes, and sometimes that might be really hard for clients, so maybe starting with an underwear on, or like a bra on if that feels more comfortable. And then as they get a little more comfortable looking at themselves and journaling, they can start to take those articles of clothing off.
Yeah. So that
Uh,
journaling, you're not trying to feel anything or make anything change. It's just noticing,
just
basically.
noticing.
Yeah.
I think something else that people could do, especially if they're partnered, and this doesn't have to be a romantic partner, it can be a sexual partner, it can even be a friend, sit down and face each other, either having your underwear on and your bra on or not, and look at each other's bodies and say what you appreciate. Like just taking a moment to really bring in that gratitude, about what we appreciate about our own bodies and the bodies of our partner.
I mean, personally, I'm remembering now, personally, there was a shift for me. I think Emily Nagoski talks about being on a media diet, you know, like be careful what we're watching and taking in. But I remember there was a real shift for me when I went to a women's spa where in the pool room, everybody's naked and it's all women. And I was sitting there looking at all the variety of bodies and thinking they're all just so beautiful. And that helped with my own acceptance, right? I,
Yeah.
something about exposing ourselves to the whole variety of real bodies wherever you might do that, right?
Yes. I also will say, the space that I felt the strongest body acceptance and comfort is spaces where there are a lot more, trans and non-binary people, so people that are not cis. And when you step into those spaces, you just see how beautiful human bodies can be, how different. And then there's this feeling of like, oh, my body, is also accepting of that. If I can find these other bodies beautiful,
Yeah.
then I can accept my own as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we have a lot to learn from queer communities about that.
Yeah. So where can people find you? I want to give you a chance to promote yourself and how you can help people.
Thank you. So, if you are in the New York City area, I do sometimes do sex education classes in person at a space called Hit Me Up, and you can Google that. And it's a great sex positive kinky poly community that does a lot of really great education. Secondly, you can also find me at my website, which is healingwithnikita.com. So that's HealingWithNikita.com. And they can also reach me through my email, which is Nikita, that's Nikita, at texgibson, TEXGIBSON.com.
I'll put those links in the show notes too, so people are, they're not
Yes,
scribbling away. Great. Well, thank
amazing.
you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This isn't something that I've talked about before, actually.
Ah, oh, I'm
Um,
so glad you did.
I am too. I feel like talking about it helped me uncover more intersections.
Great. Well, thanks.